I see that we are live and on the air. Good afternoon, everybody. This is the Vermont State Senate Committee on Institutions. Today is April the 8th, 2021. The conversation is live on YouTube, and I'm going to first start off by introducing myself, Joe Benning, the Chair of Institutions. I represent the Caledonia County District. We have with us today for committee members, Senator Ingalls from Essex Orleans, Senator McCormick from Windsor, Senator Mazza from Grand Isle. We are awaiting for one of our members, Senator Parent from Franklin County, who I hope will be joining us shortly. We are continuing a conversation that we began yesterday on the proposal to sink the good ship Adirondack in Lake Champlain. We have had a little bit of conversation about the subject of the public trust doctrine. Our first witness will be talking about that doctrine to educate the committee. And for all of the witnesses' sake, there's a couple of ground rules that I try to relate at the beginning of every committee meeting. We are on YouTube. There may be people out there who have never experienced a committee meeting before. They may be totally unfamiliar with the subject area that you are now talking about. So if I hear words that might otherwise seem normal to us committee members because we've heard the terms, or they're totally unfamiliar to us one way or the other, I'll probably interrupt and say, what does that mean? Can you explain it for the purposes of our audience? We also have three members who have not been on the committee previously, with one exception. One of those three was on the committee a long time ago. We also have a brand new legislator, so we have people who are learning this system from scratch. With that said, as each of you introduces yourself to testify, it would be most appreciated if you would start off with a very basic biographical description of who you are and how you fit into the subject that we are about to talk about. We have as our first witness, Michael O'Grady from Ledge Council, who I've asked to come and share with us and hopefully get some questions about the public trust doctrine and how that fits into our responsibilities as an institutions committee. Michael, good afternoon. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Senator. As you just stated, I'm Mike O'Grady from the Office of Legislative Counsel. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the public trust doctrine and then some concerns I have about the proposal and kind of a response to some of the statements that were made yesterday in your committee hearing. I just watched the YouTube, and I'd like to respond to some of the things that were said.
I've learned that that's a great thing for insomnia if you have that problem sleeping at night.
I wasn't able to watch the whole thing. I only had to fast forward through some of it. So the public trust doctrine, it's an ancient doctrine. It's derived from Roman law and then evolved through British law, King's law. But in the United States, it's a common law doctrine. It provides it's the state as a trustee holds navigable waters and submerged lands beneath them and trust for the benefit of the people. The purpose of the doctrine is to preserve for the public access to navigable waters for navigation, commerce, and fishing, free from obstruction by private parties. And the Vermont Supreme Court has recognized the public trust doctrine and the authority of the state to supervise and control navigable waters and the lands lying underneath them. And the core of the doctrine is the state's authority as the sovereign to exercise supervision and control over the navigable waters of the state. And the sovereign in this case is you, the General Assembly. You are where the public trust authority basically vests. It's your role to exercise the supervision and care over the public trust doctrine. With that said, however, you can delegate that authority to another entity. For example, you delegated to the city of Burlington management of the submerged lands, the public trust lands along Lake Champlain, for them to manage those lands for public use. You have delegated the issue of encroachment on waters to the Department of Environmental Conservation under Title 29. And DEC specifically is granted the public trust authority over encroachments for lakes and ponds. In Title 29 VSA Section 401, there's a statement that the lakes and ponds of the state are public trust waters, and there's a statement that DEC is the entity that will implement that public trust according to the Chapter 29 VSA Chapter 11. Yesterday, one of your witnesses said that there should be a policy for how the ferry or any other encroachment is going to be implemented. There is a policy. It's 29 VSA Chapter 11. It requires the state to determine that the proposed activity is in the public good. And there are criteria for how the state is to determine whether or not it is in the public good. So if you have delegated your public trust authority for an encroachment to DEC, and I will now read to you what an encroachment is. Oh, I just lost my page. Hold on a second. But generally, it includes, I'll just hold on. It's to place or cause to be placed any material or structure in any lakes and ponds that are public waters, or to alter or cause to be altered the lands underlying any waters, or to place or cause to be placed any bridge, dock, boathouse, cable, pipeline, or similar structure beyond the shoreline as established by the mean water level. What is being proposed here is the placing of a structure in a lake or a pond. You will say, well, is a boat a structure? Was an artificial reef a structure? Under the Federal Rivers and Harbors Act rules, an artificial reef created from a boat is a structure. So you've already delegated this authority to an agency. They already received the permit application for it. They've already issued the permit, which raises something called the vested rights doctrine in Vermont. The vested rights doctrine in Vermont follows the minority rule. And that means that a person that applies for authorization to do someone, the laws vest at the time that they apply. They have an administratively complete application, not when the permit or the authorization is issued. So the law that changes between when the application is submitted and when the permit is issued, it doesn't matter. Their rights vested at the time that they got an application in. I believe the State Historic Preservation Division was the applicant, and they applied in 2020. The law that applies to this application is the 2020 law. There's a very good legal argument that you can't change that. Now, someone will say the vested rights doctrine in Vermont has only been applied to land use cases, and that's not true. Recently, 2019, it was applied to a stormwater case, which is a water quality case. So now you're back at a water quality issue. So public trust, yes, you as a sovereign have the responsibility to manage lakes and ponds for the good of the public, including the lands underneath those lakes and ponds. But you can delegate that authority. You've delegated it to DEC. You gave them criteria to use to implement and review any encroachment on the water. Sinking of a ship is an encroachment. Historic preservation has already applied. Under the vested rights doctrine, the law that should apply to that application is the law that existed in 2020. So, and I don't think what's in the House passed version of the capital bill really controls, because it's under a section that relates to ACCD, and it says ACCD, the agency, it actually says the agency, shall not authorize the reefing of the Adirondack. Well, ACCD does not authorize encroachments. A&R authorizes encroachments. So there's a very real reading of that language that it doesn't have any application. In addition, one of the witnesses yesterday said, oh, this is a water quality issue. It's my understanding that A&R takes the position that if a boat is in Lake Champlain and it doesn't have any fluids in it, there's no risk of an ongoing discharge. If there's no risk of an ongoing discharge, it doesn't need a discharge permit. And Senator Mazza, you may remember that sailboat that was sunk up there around your town that sat there for months. And A&R said, hey, it doesn't have any liquids in it. It's not an ongoing discharge. It doesn't need to have a permit. So that's a question I have. If this ferry is stripped of all liquids, all fluids, it's not going to have an ongoing discharge, is it even a water quality issue? Are you back to it's just an encroachment issue? And I still think the Rivers and Harbors Act applies because, as I said earlier, I do think it's an artificial, it's a structure under the Rivers and Harbors Act. Lake Champlain is a Rivers and Harbors Act federal water. So it may need a permit authorization from the U.S. Corps of Engineers to make sure it's not an obstruction to navigation. So that's where I kind of come down on this. I just was informed of this yesterday. I did my best to come up to knowledge on this. And I just look at this and I see a bunch of issues.
When you say looking at this, you're talking about the statement in the Capitol bill.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Michael, are you the staff attorney for Natural Resources and Energy?
Yes, and one of the staff attorneys, Ellen Tchaikovsky, is also one, but I do water.
Okay. And your opinion right now is that this is not a water quality issue, it's an encroachment issue.
I think that's A&R's policy for boats that are sunk in Lake Champlain. If it does not have fluid on it that poses a risk of ongoing discharge, then it's not regulated under 10 VSA Chapter 47, which is the water quality chapter. It's regulated under 29 VSA Chapter 11, which is the encroachment chapter.
Before we get any further, could you just red flag for yourself? I would like a very brief opinion on the subject you've just talked about, because I have a feeling there's going to be some discussion between our committee and the House committee. And I want to make sure I have something in hand when I get there. It doesn't have to be very long, but you've drawn a couple of legal conclusions, and I want to make sure I'm not talking out of thin air.
Sure, it won't take me long to do that.
Okay. Committee questions. Senator Mazza.
I go back to my original statement I've made the last 3 or 4 days is how can we legislate something not be done if we have no jurisdiction and they've gone through the process of getting the permits? What authority do we have to say you can't do something if you've applied and received all the permits necessary? And I use the example of someone wants to put an apartment house up, they get all the permits, the sewer, everything, and then the legislature with no money involved says to them, no, you can't do it. And that scares me of that precedent that we're setting, let alone whether it's a boat or whatever is in a lake. If they have met all the criteria for this, and yet what jurisdiction do we have as a legislature to say it's null and void, it's no good? I go back to that same issue. I don't know what I'm missing here.
I don't think you are missing anything. I think your example of the person seeking those building permits, that's Vermont Supreme Court has said we're not going to allow the law to change. Your rights vest in the law as they existed when you applied, right? So the law, if the law changes, it doesn't affect you. It's when you applied. In addition, you raised the issue of separation of powers. You've delegated this program. The program implemented the program according to the criteria and statute, I assume, and they've issued a permit. Now you're going to say that that permit can't be issued. That's like telling the Commissioner of Fish and Wildlife that he can't give Bob a hunting license to hunt deer, because the Fish and Wildlife are public trust resources. Bob can go and get a hunting license if he's not a felon, etc. And there's you're in the same situation. You're potentially overstepping the legislative role and trying to execute the law instead of establish the law.
You know, I agree with Senator Maz. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but it seems like ex post facto, you know, in the fact that, you know, we're making it after the fact. We can change this law going forward after this one, but, you know, I've seen projects like a Walmart in St. Albans take 25 years to get built. I'd hate to see the legislature get involved and delay things like that more. So this reminds me, you know, whether you like the rule or not,
that's right.
these are the rules they had to play by when they started this process. We shouldn't be interfering.
So what flagged this for me initially was seeing language in the Capitol bill and then hearing from the House that this was a decision based on what I'm hearing clearly were water quality issues and the potential for water quality issues. And I've been very uncomfortable with a Committee on Institutions making a call on water quality issues. Clearly, that's not in our jurisdiction. I do have an understanding from you, Michael, that encroachment on the lake, since the lake bed is part of the state lands, that this committee would have say in that conversation. But as I also understand it, the Army Corps of Engineers have issued a permit, so navigation is not an issue. The Department of Environmental Conservation issued a permit, so at least to them, the environment was not an issue. And I'm really scratching my head. This in scope is probably a very small thing in comparison to the capital budget, but it is a very large leap for mankind as far as I can see about committees crossing jurisdictions. And I guess I keep scratching my head trying to figure out how did that happen? And it may literally be one of the only things we're in disagreement with the House on with the Capitol bill. So it could be some hot and heavy conversation on what amounts to nothing in the capital budget, because these folks are not asking for any money from us. They may have some maintenance situations down the road, but right now there's no request for money. I don't think I'm missing anything. I'm not a lawyer either, but I do play one on TV. It just seems like we've crossed a line that should not have been crossed, and it establishes a precedent. I cannot see the Natural Resources Committee deciding that a transportation issue, like where a bridge needs to be fixed, suddenly making the claim that a bridge should not be fixed, because that clearly is not within their jurisdiction unless there's some environmental impact. But I guess I'm willing to wait out and hear from the rest of the witnesses. Anybody else have any questions for Michael?
Thank you, Michael. That was a good overview. Appreciate it.
Yeah, very succinct and very clear. But I would appreciate your giving me an opinion. And if you would please send a copy of that to Senator Bray and to Alice Emmons.
Sure.
Just let them know that I asked that you forward it to them. Okay, Michael, thank you very much for coming. The next witness that I have on my list is John Groveman, Policy and Water Program Director with the Vermont Natural Resources Council. John, welcome to Senate Institutions. I'm not sure that we've ever met before. I'm Joe Benning, and I'm the chair of the committee, somewhat the gatekeeper of everything that goes on here. I did not see your name earlier, so I'll let you know what I told everybody else initially. We are on YouTube, and we have an audience that is unknown. Could be people out there that know everything about what we're talking about. Could also be people out there that have never been to a committee room before, have no idea what VNRC stands for. So I try to get each witness to identify not only themselves, but the organization at a very basic level, so our potential audience of people coming in for the first time understand and know what everybody's about on the screen. So welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Benning. So we have met. I don't know if you remember, I've been in Senate Judiciary the last 3 years on the medical monitoring strict liability bill.
Did you have a beard then?
I have a beard now. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe that's why I don't recognize you.
Oh, did I have a beard? You know, I'm getting older. I've changed throughout the years, but and I've met you, and I really appreciated your thoughtful approach to that bill on the committee. And so we have that, but I've never been before this committee. I've been doing work in Vermont on environmental issues since 1995, and I've never been before this committee before. And, you know, I listened to, I got kicked off my internet, and I think that's why my picture's a little fuzzy. I'm having some internet issues. But also first for YouTube, I'm John Groveman. I'm the Policy and Water Program Director for the Vermont Natural Resources Council, or VNRC is what we're known as. VNRC is Vermont's oldest state environmental advocacy group. We've been around since 1963, working on issues related to water quality, forest health, sustainable communities, and climate and energy over the last 10 years. So that's who VNRC is. We do a lot of work in the State House on policy. We do a lot of work with the Agency of Natural Resources and other state agencies on regulatory issues. And I am a lawyer. I am an attorney. And there's one other attorney at VNRC, and we get involved with legal issues in the courts related to environmental issues. So that is who I am. So I listened to Attorney O'Grady's testimony. And so I'm also, so VNRC has been working with Lake Champlain Committee, Conservation Law Foundation, on the Lakes and Ponds encroachment permit. We commented on the permit. We had concerns about the project that I believe, so you had, Lauren was in, right, from Lake Champlain Committee, and there she is right now. And she went over the concerns. I'm not going to repeat that. You know, basically those were the concerns that we made in the comment. Now the permit has been issued. We're looking at whether or not we're going to appeal the permit, which is our right to do that as entities that commented on the permit. And we're looking at the standard in the permit, which is whether or not the proposal is in the public good. That's the statutory standard. Public good is defined in the statute, is what is in the what is the greatest benefit to all Vermonters. That's what the statute says. Public good has been defined through case precedent as having two components. An applicant needs to prove that there is a public good component to the project. And even if an applicant proves that, an applicant must then prove that the project won't interfere with public trust uses. And that gets into what Attorney O'Grady was talking about. Lake Champlain's a public trust resource. Public trust uses are, in layman's terms, swimming, fishing, boating, and water quality. So you have to prove both of those things. And so before I go any further, we've been working through the permit channels. as we do, right, on a variety of permits, and we comment and we talk with the agency, and sometimes we appeal if we feel that the permit has been issued and it does not meet the criteria. We would never come to the legislature and say overturn a permit. We got involved in this in the legislature because of the capital bill, and because my understanding was there was money in the capital bill for the project, and that's where this started legislatively. And then the debate inevitably about the money turned to the merits of the project and the permits that are required and whether the permits meet the criteria and so on and so forth. So that's kind of how I got here today. And I think that since people are testifying and saying that, the support for the project and there's all these good things about the project, and people absolutely have the right to take that position and to make that case. I think we wanted legislators to know that there are groups out there and people out there who are concerned about the project, that it's not a unanimous position, that there are no issues with this, that there are concerns about the precedent of sinking boats in waters. There are concerns about whether it is in the public good, given the narrow community of people who will be able to take advantage of the diving opportunities provided, by sinking the ship. I think these are all legitimate issues, and that's what we're pursuing and debating. So I guess I'm going to stop there. Like, what's helpful to you? So I don't really give in, Senator Benning, what you said, like I didn't get on the witness list to make a plea to this committee to basically pass a law, to stop this project. We, as I said, got pulled into the funding committees because of funds, right? It did seem appropriate to say we shouldn't spend public dollars on a project that we don't think, if someone wants to pay, if there's someone out there who wants to apply for a permit and pay the costs of the project, that's one thing. We were opposed to spending public dollars. If you're not spending public dollars on the project, I would agree that it's the jurisdiction of the Natural Resources Committees to decide as a policy matter whether we should be sinking anything in our public waters, and if so, under what circumstances, and are the laws that the Agency of Natural Resources administers sufficient or not to address these concerns. And to Senator Parent's point, not just this issue, but going forward, what should the policy of the state be with regard to sinking ships or perhaps other things into our public waters? So I think that's a valid policy debate, but I agree that shouldn't happen here. So I'm going to stop and ask you what you know.
Sure. No,
yeah.
let me be clear about why I suggested that folks who had been proposing this come in and talk to us.
Yeah.
I want to be clear before I make any move to say to the House, we disagree with a provision in the capital bill that you've sent over to us. And I want to know what motivated them in the first place to put the language in. And if we are going to take an opposite position, why it would be that I'm doing that. So I'm trying to get in my own head very clearly what went on that led to us being in this position. As I understand the initial testimony, you were saying when you went initially, it was because you were under the impression that the House was going to give money to this project specifically. Now, this is where it gets a little bit confusing. There are additional sites that the House has dedicated an expenditure for, and that money would be used for those additional sites. And in fact, I understand it's $10,000 more than what the governor had initially recommended. But it is not my understanding that there is any money being requested in the capital bill from the folks who would like to sink this ship in order to have that done, that is in fact all private money at this stage at least. There is an ongoing requirement for the state historic preservation and the folks associated with making sure these sites are protected, that there may be some maintenance costs down the road, but we're talking basically buoys, signage if necessary, and the like. to make sure that that is a site maintained for the safety of the public. I also understand that when the House was debating the bill and before it came to us, that the Department of Environmental Conservation had not yet issued a permit. So that is a change that happened between that bill coming out of there and coming over to us. When the permit was issued, I do understand VNRC and virtually anybody else has a right to appeal that decision. I don't want to get in the way of that process. I think that's the healthy, normal course of government. But what is very concerning to me, anyway, as the chair of this committee, is that we have adopted a piece of language that, in my eyes, is clearly beyond our normal jurisdiction. And the precedent of that is very troubling. I cannot see the institutions committee suddenly up and saying, we have a dispute about the way a railroad track is going to be laid down. If we don't have any control over that land and its jurisdiction is either in the federal government or in the transportation committee, it shouldn't be the institutions committee that comes along and says, we think that needs to stop. So we're at that place. I don't want to leave the impression I'm dismissing whatever environmental concerns may be out there and whatever appealable issues may be dealt with in the proper arena. But I'm way out of line with this one on it being in our jurisdiction. It's just not the proper place to be. So I appreciate you coming. I think it is important to understand the difference between the environmental path, if you will, which takes an appeal in the current permit. But I have to be clear for the committee, if we're going to have committee discussion, how are we going to proceed and under what rationale? And you're here to provide us some of that educational process. So I do appreciate your coming. With that, I'm going to turn it over to the committee to see if anybody has any questions or comments.
I mean, I guess I agree with everything. I don't even think natural resources has jurisdiction on this. I don't think we have any jurisdiction to stop something that's already been in law. I think the only thing natural resources could do is say, from this point forward, this is how we view projects like this, but we can't. I think the legal precedent that Michael said is what it is. And I think we're spending a lot of time and energy on an issue that really in my mind has been decided.
Right. So so Senator Parent, so just to be, this is what the point of what I was saying. So I didn't come here today to make a pleaded institutions committee to validate a permit. I came here because there have been hearings in the House on this, and now there are hearings in the Senate, and people are making representations about whether this is good, whether it's bad, whatever. It's never, it feels good when you have concerns about something to let people come and publicly testify and say, we think this is great. We think this is whatever. And then we just want to, I think, go on record that there are opposing views. Those people, and they're on the Zoom, have every right to take that position and to make their case. But if they're going to be making their case, I think we would be remiss if we didn't show up and say, hey, there's a bunch of people, there's a bunch of organizations that represent thousands of Vermonters that don't agree. But again, I'm a lawyer. I understand. I'm not coming here asking this committee to overturn a permit decisions. We are working actively through the permit process. We commented on the permit, and now we're thinking about evaluating whether we should appeal the permit or not. That's what we were in the process of doing. This happens to be going on at the same time. I would disagree that I think there's a legitimate policy issue about sinking things in our public waters that is in the jurisdiction of the Natural Resources Committee. Again, not to go to that committee and say, invalidate a permit, get involved with a specific case. I know that there's long-standing and clear law that the legislature shouldn't intervene on an active litigation, and I've been involved with a number of active litigations where the legislature took testimony. They wanted to understand what was happening because maybe there were some policy changes that would, the legislature wanted to consider based on the issues that are being litigated. But I do think there's a legitimate policy issue there. Senator McCormick is on Natural Resources Committee, and there was some testimony today. And I think the use of public waters for these type of uses, I think, should be debated, and maybe the legislature could take some prospective action. So
one good thing that has come out of this discussion, Michael alluded a little bit to a permit having been granted, so there must be some policy out there by which that permit decision was made. But the other thing that we heard yesterday from Laura Treichman was that they were actually developing policy to answer that very question. Under what circumstances should a ship be sunk? And that policy is going to end up in a rule. It's going to have to end up in front of LCAR. So while we may have some muddied water here about why you're actually here, I'm going to say that there's actually something good that is coming out of this conversation, because I completely agree with you that any public lands that has a potential environmental impact ought to have some kind of policy associated with it in what we decide to do with it. But I do think that's actually in the works. So there's some good coming out of this. There's one other good, and I'll tell you that at the end of your testimony.
right. No, and I think that's great. And don't get me wrong, I'm happy to be here, and it checks off my before I retire, which won't be soon enough. I got to check off that I've been in front of every committee in the legislature, and I could check this one off my list. I got to go look at my I've got my card, my punch card. I got to go look to see what other committees I'll need to punch, but this was definitely one of them. But I'm happy to be here, and it's an important issue, and I'm glad it's being discussed, and I'm glad, we've learned a lot. We did not know, as groups commenting on the permit, that there was a policy being developed. So that's good to know. I heard something in Senate Natural Resources testimony about some of the policy directions where the Agency of Natural Resources may be headed. I think, I don't disagree with Attorney O'Grady that the broader policy is in the Lakes and Ponds encroachment statute, but it's a broad statute that deals with all kind of encroachments into the lake. I think we're talking about, as you are, Senator Benning, a specific policy about sinking things. For 2 years during my career, I was the director of the Water Resources Board, which used to hear appeals of lakes and ponds encroachment permits, and we dealt with a number of them. It was in the early 2000s, and it was a really hotly contested issues with some large marinas on Lake Champlain, and we had vigorous debates about public good and public trust. This is an interesting case because there really isn't precedent about sinking things in the lake, right? Mostly the cases are about, as I said, docks and marinas, fish and wildlife access areas, things of that nature. So I do think that there's a need for a micro policy. This is a different sort of use that, yes, falls within the broader policy of the Lakes and Ponds encroachment statute, but I do think it raises some issues of first impression.
Yeah, we have had 200 years of sinking vessels. We just haven't had the refined micro policy that you're talking about here, but it does sound like we're on our way to getting there. I saw Senator Ingalls' hand up first.
Chair, it doesn't matter whether we favor sinking this boat. It doesn't matter anything, whether we think about sinking anything. You've done a great job of fleshing this out, that the Senate institutions has no business to be determining whether it's legal, whether it's not. You've got it to a great point by getting the people here, and with Mr. O'Grady and the other witnesses as well. It's just beyond the scope of what we were supposed to be doing. I mean, and it really, really is. I mean, we have no business telling them whether they can sink a ship or not. It has no business being, the discussion has no business really being, I don't believe, after we figured out where we've got to, whether we shouldn't even be talking about it, after that point. But that's my opinion about it.
Russ, we're going to have a committee conversation when the witnesses are all done, and everybody will take whatever position, and then we'll vote on what we want to do about it. But appreciate your thought process. Senator Mazza was the next one I saw up, and then Senator McCormick.
No, I think all the efforts that they're going on this boat, I think that a lot of the emphasis should be put on Burlington pumps millions and millions and millions of gallons of raw sewage in the lake, and yet that continues day after day or year after year, and nothing is done about it. So we're talking about a boat here that's been all decommissioned and everything, and legally got their permit, and yet no one seems to be upset about the Burlington sewer overflow, which I think is up to 25 million gallons of gone raw sewage now into the lake. So It puzzles me how this is all transpiring. Thank you.
I think a lot of people are upset about the overflow issue, Senator. I don't think that I'm upset
Yeah,
about the
but
overflow.
what's being done about it? Absolutely nothing.
That's not, I mean, not enough is being done about it. I agree with you. So let's, we've been advocating for years we need to spend millions and millions of dollars to upgrade our treatment plants. With the money coming from the federal government, we have an opportunity for the first time in a generation to maybe even do that. I completely agree, but I don't think that issue and the need to address that issue means that this isn't also an issue about what we dump into the lake. So I just don't see that having one problem means that we shouldn't also identify other problems.
So Burlington's got a permit to overflow, and this permit, they got to sink the boat, is legal, but yet there's some opposition. I can't say any more about it. It's over. Thank you.
Senator McCormick. You're muted, Dick.
Thank you. First, I want to thank Senator Mazza for his remarks, and I couldn't agree more about municipal sewage. And also that's the most spectacular offense, but it's also just the general flow of phosphorus from the entire watershed into Lake Champlain. And indeed, it's a problem. I'm not entirely convinced that this is not our jurisdiction. Perhaps environmental issues are not. Questions of pollution are not. But the lake is a public trust. It belongs to the people of Vermont, and we are the people's trustees. And so I think questions of how a state asset is properly used or not used, I think we deal with buildings, we deal with prisons, we deal with stuff the state, stuff that is under the jurisdiction of the state, and the physical plant in particular. And in that regard, I'm not sure stepping out of the question of pollution, which is still a question, but stepping out of it for the moment, I'm not sure that making the lake into a junkyard is the proper use of the lake, even if we can do it without PCBs leaking out of the creases in the boat and so on.
Let me just try to get control of the conversation. These are all good talking points, and our committee is going to have a lot of conversation after we're done with all the witnesses. I just want to make sure if John has anything else he wants to say or anybody wants to ask John while he's still here. Now I'd like to concentrate on doing that. Anybody else have any questions for John? Okay. I'm going to say, John, you had one other really great thing that you said today, and I'm hoping my committee didn't miss it, but Denise does have this recorded. He appreciated my work on the Judiciary Committee. I hope you guys all heard that.
I very much
Oh,
do.
yeah.
Do you serve on that committee, Mr. Chair?
John, thank you very much for coming. We'll cut that one off right there.
We have Art Cohen here too, Mr. Chair.
Yes, we do. We actually have a couple of more witnesses. And in my list, I have John Paul from Lake Champlain Ferry Company as the next one up. John, welcome.
Here we go. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Yeah, this is my first Zoom meeting on this computer, so I may be a little bit awkward at times.
Even those of us who are most experienced are having the exact same problems you are. So
okay. Good to know. Good to know. Well, my name is John Paul. I'm the port engineer for Lake Champlain Transportation Company. I started working there in 1976. When I was a college student and got hooked, and lo and behold, I'm still here. I worked on the Adirondack for roughly 40 years, maintaining it and sailing it back and forth across Lake Champlain. And we've gone to great extremes to do this in the right manner, to sink the Adi, to make it safe. We're following the EPA's guidelines for reefing vessels, and it's a very robust document. A lot of thought went into it. It was written in, I believe, 2008, so it's not particularly old. And I kind of want to just talk a little bit about the Addie. She was built in 1913, so she's well over 100 years old. She was built in Jacksonville, Florida. She ran there for a while. She ran in New York City. She ran in Philadelphia. She ran in the Chesapeake, and then she came to Lake Champlain in 1954. And she served a 65-year career here, so she was here longer than anywhere else. And I do consider her historically important artifact. It's one of those things that scrapping her is one of the things that really it makes me ill, to be honest with you. But the reality of trying to make it into a shore-based use is really impractical, very impractical. And very often those things, they are not monitored and they end up sinking at the dock, causing way more harm than they would being cleaned to the point where we're going to clean it. I just want to go from there. I'd like to address Senator McCormick's question yesterday about why divers would like to dive something that was just purposely put there rather than came there by some catastrophic event. The Adirondack was sailed for 65 years within 67 feet of where it's going to rest. So, and it'll be oriented even in the same direction as the path that she traveled. And it's a moving thing to swim through a ship, even ones that have been artificially positioned. You think about the people that worked on them, the lives they had. I've been a diver since I was 12 and have been diving on a lot of shipwrecks. And some of my favorite shipwrecks are ones that were artificially positioned. And it's a moving thing to swim through a shipwreck. It's almost, I can't even describe it fully. But I just want to let you know that it is not something we take lightly. It's not like somebody building a jungle gym and swimming around the jungle gym. It's way more than that. And this is a once in a lifetime opportunity to do this. We do have to do something with the vessel because we can't afford to keep it up. It's very expensive to keep one of those things floating. It's due for hull work again. If it were going to be maintained, and that would cost hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars to get it to the point where it would last another 40 years. And the tying it to a dock, there aren't any places to do that now. I mean, there are a few places in Burlington, but it's $100,000 a year rent. So it's from a business standpoint, we really can't keep the Addie. So, and unfortunately, the Lake Champlain Transportation Company is a business. It does have a bottom line, or it'll cease to exist. So, and I just would like to answer any questions that any of you have. I'd be happy to go through the cleaning process. I don't know how easily I can condense that, but I can try. And I'll leave that up to you.
It sort of got crossed into our conversation that this would be a water quality issue. I don't know if you can synthesize in some good fashion for our committee, because this is not normally our jurisdiction, but the cleanup that is occurring or is going to go on, can you give us a 50,000 foot level view of what that means?
Sure. The first item that the EPA is concerned about is oil. That'd be diesel fuel, lubricating oils, greases, all those kind of things. We're taking out, or have taken out, all the machinery that contains oil. We've taken out all the lubricating oil tanks. We're going to take out the fuel tanks, so they won't even be in the vessel. It's not like we're cleaning those; we're actually removing them from the vessel, and that would be the biggest source of pollution is petroleum. The next thing on the list, I believe, was lead paint, and we had a survey done in 2017 or 2018. It's been a while now, so I'm not exactly sure of the date, but probably 10% of the vessel has lead paint on it, and it's under layers of more modern oil-based paints. So what we are required to do is scrape any loose paint off, so that what happens when the boat goes down, if the lead paint will stay with the wreck, it won't float off into the water column, and that's important. Once it stays with the wreck, like the interior of the wreck, there's very little current or anything to disturb it. It'll stay there, what little there is. And these are trace amounts we're talking about. If there's 10 or 15 pounds of lead on the whole boat, I would be amazed. The old water intake pipes in Burlington, each joint, there's a joint every I believe it's 20 feet, is a leaded joint that probably has 30 pounds of lead in it. So that gives you some idea of the I don't know what you would want to call that, but it gives you some idea of the scope of that possible contamination. The other is PCBs, and they were used in some specialized paints, like the things that they mark doorways with, and high gloss stuff that they used in certain areas. And the analyst that did the testing, or did the survey, is aware of that, and he was able to pick out a few spots that had those. And any of those chips that he took, the highest was 15 parts per million, and the action level by the EPA is 50 parts per million. And like I said, there was very little of that paint on the boat that had that. So whatever is loose will get scraped off and disposed of, and we have to do that in an environmentally responsible fashion too. And that's all that stuff takes time and money, but it's within the scope of our job. So and then the other thing is plastics and floatables. We've removed all the wiring, all the electronic devices. That's actually one of the greatest sources of PCBs is wiring and electronic devices. So that every single bit of wiring has been removed from the vessel. Every electronic device has been removed from the vessel. All the plastic parts, even the toilet seats, have been removed from the vessel. Things like thermostats, all those things are gone. And then the other thing they're concerned about is floatables, and that would be things like wooden parts that aren't fastened well. That we have to. There's a rubber roofing on the hurricane deck. That's the upper deck below the smokestack. It's like a commercial building roof, and that's got to be removed. And then that'll leave wooden planking underneath it, and we will strap the wooden planking with a 1/4 by 2 inch steel flat bar and tech screws that will not pull out and keep the ship intact. So that's the 5-minute version, I guess.
So I've got to know, you get to sink this thing. How do you keep it from sinking upside down?
Well, we hired a consulting firm named Artificial Reefs International, and they are very good at that. What we do is we moor it in a place with probably 6 moorings in a circle around the vessel. We have We put concrete ballast in the very bottom of it. She has a V-shaped hull, so it's actually a good shape to sink, so that it'll go down upright. And then we cut holes in the hull above the water line, so that you open the C valves, and it takes a little while for that to get down to the point where it lets that water in. But once that goes in, once that gets under, that accelerates it, and it doesn't give it time to turn. So it more or less goes straight down. And it's a V-bottom hull. We didn't want to put it on a hard bottom. That's why one of the reasons we chose the location where it is. It's a sediment bottom, and it will probably list somewhat when it hits the bottom. But to predict that is almost impossible. But it wouldn't be any more than 30 degrees, and I doubt it would be that. It'd probably be like 10 degrees.
Okay. Committee, any questions for John? I don't see any hands rising. John, thank you very much for coming.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I'm impressed with this process.
I wish you were the only one sending me emails right now, because you're in the minority.
Oh.
That's another subject. My next witness is Zach Porter from the Conservation Law Foundation. I don't see him on the screen. Denise, do we know anything about his whereabouts?
Yes, I'm sorry. When I sent you the hopefully last agenda, it was not the last agenda. He couldn't make it today.
Okay. That leaves us with our last witness of the day then, Art Cohn. Art, welcome to the Institutions Committee.
I'm delighted to be here. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, and again, if you could introduce yourself and how you fit into this picture would be most helpful.
Thank you. First, I want to thank Chairman, particularly Senator Mazza, for inviting me to provide some perspective and make some remarks. My name is Art Cohn. I'm from Ferrisburg. I am a professional nautical geologist. I've been working in Lake Champlain for more than 40 years. I am the co-founder and director emeritus of the Lake Champlain Maritime Museum. And I've directed a survey over a decade that has systematically examined all the bottom of Lake Champlain to inventory and identify the public collection of historic resources there. Perhaps my greatest interest and maybe contribution has been in the area of public policy and law as it relates to historic underwater resources, of which Vermont has been a leader. I'm proud to say that it was about 36 years ago that I partnered with the Vermont Division for Conservation, the then archaeologist Giovanna Peebles and the staff there to establish this underwater historic preserve program as a way to provide reasonable access to appropriate sites that are public resources. This was the first program of its type in the United States. And so I have a great interest in this project. I have not been intimately involved in the actual nuts and bolts of the Adirondack because people like John Paul and Jonathan Eddy and Laura and others are so competent and are so diligent in this that I've really been able to monitor, listen to the reports, and feel quite comfortable about the due diligence that's been performed to take care of our historic resources and our beloved Lake Champlain. We talk about the public trust doctrine and trying to identify the public good, the greatest benefit for all Vermonters. And I would just point out that the reefing of the Adirondack has really some incredible opportunities for public benefit. The historic preservation benefit, the actual preservation of this structure on the bottom of Lake Champlain is, to me, priceless. This vessel, but for a transformation into an underwater public museum dive site, would be probably scrapped and disappear and really just exist in memories. Now she will exist as a three-dimensional object that can be shared with a diving community. I would also like to point out it's not just divers who will benefit from this transformation. We now have programs where the general public, you don't have to be able to swim. You can come out on a boat. We can put you on the same mooring that the divers might use that are provided by the state of Vermont. Put a camera over the side with a big screen on the vessel you're on, and you can enjoy this site and its history and its career in real time with getting a great taste of the environmental issues, the fisheries issues. You can be under Lake Champlain without being a diver. And I think that has huge high value because we talk about protecting Lake Champlain and we talk about investments in Lake Champlain and the stormwater system and things like that. It's been my experience that those goals are well served and better served by a public that cares. They have to know the lake. They have to care about the lake. They have to have had some intimate contact with the lake. And this program really is part of the menu of things that let that happen. I can also say, although this would not be my reason for doing this, that I believe there will be some significant positive economic impacts to this boat being in Lake Champlain. The sinking will generate stories around the attraction value of this vessel to a world diving community could be quite significant, where all of a sudden we've got people coming here from Japan and China and around the world to see this site. And really, it's really the entree or a gateway to the extraordinary history and the other historic sites that are part of the Underwater Historic Preserve Program. In many ways, it's a gateway or an ambassador for all of that. And I would simply point out that the people that have advocated for this are lovers of Lake Champlain. They're devoted to Lake Champlain. They've worked in and on Lake Champlain for decades. Nobody would do anything that we felt after proper study and due diligence might degrade or harm Lake Champlain. So I agree with John Paul. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity. Having worked on the lake for as long as I have, we've had other people come to us with, hey, I've got a 20-foot sailboat. Can we make it part of the preserve? I've got this particular thing. And there's been nothing that has really risen to the occasion. About 3 years ago, I received a phone call from the folks at LCT seeking my opinion about whether the Adirondack might make a candidate for these reefing programs in our lake. And I was very positive about it and encouraging about it. And so I'm delighted to have the opportunity to share my thoughts. Again, thank you, Senator Mazza, for inviting me to do that. And be happy to answer any questions along the way about the public good as we perceive it. And I agree with the discussion as it goes on with the permitting issues and the jurisdictional issues. Those are kind of separate and important issues, but I look at the heart of the program. What are we preserving here, and how does it value our generation and future generations by providing this extraordinary act of preservation and providing a recreational opportunity for generations to come. Thank you.
Committee, questions? Okay, Art, I have one. Are you familiar with the Historical Museum on Isle La Motte?
Yes.
let's just say hypothetically speaking, if somebody were to find a very old British coin on a public beach there, would that museum be a good place to have that housed?
I think that's a really good question. Certainly, the proximity, objects should be kind of in the place where their history was made, if it's feasible to do that. So it turns out that Isle Mont has an extraordinary connection to the War of 1812. Commodore McDonough actually stationed his fleet at the north end of Isle Mont prior to the Battle of Plattsburgh Bay, which was one of the most important naval battles in international history and really helped bring the War of 1812 to a close. And there was an event that took place there that is not widely known, but is one of the great stories of the War of 1812, and as it relates to citizens, and that is that Caleb Hill ran a tavern at the north end of Lake Champlain, of Isle Mont, and a ferry crossing. And one day, some American sailors came in there pretending to be British sailors to try to test Caleb Hill's allegiance to the cause. And in the course of that effort, it became actually a physical struggle, and a gun went off and Caleb Hill was killed. And those stories are valuable reminders of the great history that has taken place on Lake Champlain. The United States would be a very different place, but for the Battle of Alcor Island, the Battle of Plattsburgh Bay, the commercial fleets, the canals, and all of that. We would not recognize this community without this rich density of history that we are really stewards of. So there, I fear, is a longer answer for your very good question of, I would first look to the local historical societies. The Isle Mont Historical Society, which I'm a proud member of for the last 30 years, would be a wonderful candidate for that.
So give me your best guess as to how a British half pence from 1733 would end up on Isle Mont.
There was so much activity. Remember, the French actually had a fort on Isle Mont from the 1760s on. There were gun emplacements on Isle Mont, people stationed on Isle Mont, all through the French and Indian War, Rev War, and War of 1812, because if you think about the strategic location of Isle Mont, it was a very active place that saw a lot of activity. And so where people do their history, they leave their stuff behind. And if the stuff is there long enough, it becomes archaeologically important. And I think you probably are talking about one of those objects.
Well, it was actually the second thing I found using a metal detector, and I want to make sure it gets a good home. I'm not done staring at it.
Yeah, it was in my district, wasn't it? By God, I tell you, huh? You wouldn't tell us before.
I've been beating around this bush for a long time. But
it came out, committee. It came out today.
Suffice to say that when I came across it, it was immediately after I found an old hinge, and I'm like, oh, big deal. But literally, this was the second thing I found with my metal detector, and it was about 6 to 8 inches down. It was on a beach, and when I looked at it, I could see Georgievus II written on one side, and I had to stare at it for a really long period of time. I'm thinking, this is nothing that we normally see in currency here, but on the reverse side, under Britannia, was 1733, and it deserves a home, I think, in that locality. One of your successors at the Lake Champlain Maritime Museum, who's now the head of the Fairbanks Museum, suggested that I deposit it there. And now that I know that you remember, we'll have some more conversation. I'm not quite.
I think you've hit a fabulous point, which is the objects draw us into the history.
Yeah.
So that object in a case is just an object in a case, but when it brings you into the story of the military, the sequence of military events and the impacts and the losses and the ships, it becomes a wonderful tool for historians and people interested in those things to try to engage folks in the story. So I think based on now what you've identified this thing as, Isle of Mont would be the ideal spot.
Good to know. So committee, that's where it's going to end up when I'm done staring at it.
Great job, Art. God, like always.
Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for the
Thank
invitation.
you. Thank you, Art.
All right, the committee needs to have some conversation, and we need to put this issue to bed so I can figure out how to deal with the House. Corey, I want to go back to something you said. This was a unanimous decision by the House committee. So I don't know what motivates them and how we're going to respond, but I want to make sure that we are addressing every angle we possibly can before I go over there and make some kind of a case. So committee, we're up for conversation. Dick McCormick, I'm sensing it's a 4-1 vote right now, although I haven't pinned you down yet. If you're still inclined to be in favor of retaining the language, why don't you give us your best shot and tell us why?
I think I already did.
Okay.
I have articulated my reasoning. In fact, the only reason I wanted to do it earlier is I didn't want to be guilty of presenting myself one way to one committee and differently to another committee.
Can I ask Dick a question?
Yeah,
Without objection.
I'll be interrogated.
Whether it's this issue or another issue, don't you agree that the permitting process in Vermont is very, very tough to go through? And if a person does get a permit, doesn't this open a door for we as legislators to disregard that permit that people spend millions of dollars for? How can we go down a road that it's already been permitted? Now, if it was prior to that, we were giving them money, I could see some concern. But how can you justify having someone go through a permit process and spend hours and lots of money, and then the legislature, with no financial involvement, says to them, your permit is no good? How can you do that?
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a fair enough argument, Senator.
Whether it's a ferry or anything else. I
first of
don't
all,
care if
the
it's a
idea
ferry
that-
or anything else. Yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay, the idea that our permitting process is rigorous, and many people would say overly rigorous. It
Yep.
kind of depends on who you ask, and it depends on the particular issue. There are a lot of we hear a lot from people who feel aggrieved by the permitting process, but there are a lot of people who feel that stuff gets to happen that probably shouldn't have had happened. But the other thing is, I agree with you that it's not our job to start second guessing the bureaucracy. We write the law, we hand it off to them and say, okay, you make it happen. And they have administrative discretion, and we're supposed to respect that. I get that. But I think in this case, there are issues besides the water pollution issues, the kinds of things that DEC is looking at. As I said, for me, the idea is simply, is this the right way to use the lake? And I'm not sure what our authority is on it, but certainly it is a public trust, and we are the trustees for the people. The people own that lake, and we exercise, like when a minor inherits, the parents are trustees of that minor's inheritance. We are trustees of the lake. I don't think
But shouldn't you be the ones, or we should be the ones to change the law if we don't like what's happening in the future? If someone's already gone through, and we could discuss
Yes.
this for hours, but I mean, I can see changing a law in the future, but when someone goes through the permitting process and the agency of environmental okayed it for every reason possible, and like I said, whether I'm for the ferry or not, that's not the issue. Is I'm trying to protect the permitting in this state. And I know you're a big supporter of, Act 250, which that's fine, and we all should be.
Yeah.
But now we're taking it out of the hands of the process and putting it in our hands. And next year I could put in that bill that I don't want the docks on Lake Champlain, and so we could do that in the future.
What?
I'm
Senator, I
stunned here.
take your point. I say, no, you're making a strong argument. I'll yield.
I'm just trying to figure this out. That's what scares me. It doesn't necessarily scare me
Yeah.
about the ferry. It scares me about future. We will go on record as saying we override the permit process. That's my only concern.
Dick, what do you take from Mike O'Grady's comments that we do have the public trust? We've also delegated that responsibility to a committee that has gone through the committee process, and the applicant has been successful. Is there some response you have to, in spite of that, we should have a responsibility to override it if we disagree with the decision that's been made?
I wish I had prepared. I should have looked up the case. There was a Chicago case around 1900 where the government of Chicago basically delegated the running of the harbor to a private company. And the U.S. Supreme Court, it was a federal case, but the principle, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that they had the authority under the Constitution to delegate authority. They did not have the right to delegate responsibility. That the responsibility, it still stays with us. That was what the Vermont Supreme Court found in the Brigham decision about educational funding, is that the state had delegated education funding to the towns. But those taxes, the town taxes, are actually state taxes that we had delegated to the town, and that we could not. So the state was still responsible for the inequities and the funding. I'm changing the subject, but there's that principle that the state's delegation of authority does not mean we can just say, well, it's not our responsibility anymore. It's as though okay, you lend me $10, okay, and then Dick Mazza lends you $10, and you say, well, don't pay me. I owe McCormick 10, so why don't you just pay McCormick? I go to you for the money, and you say, well, no, Dick's supposed to pay you that. That's not an answer to me. Okay, that's actually a good analogy. I realize the way I said it sounds old barbed.
We could say, Dick, that all development in Burlington ceases tomorrow morning until they get their sewer fixed. That we don't pump raw sewer in the lake.
Absolutely.
There are those who
You want to put that to a vote?
No, but I mean,
We could say that. It's the same
You
difference.
could say that. You could say no development in Burlington. Not one more apartment shall be built until they stop pouring millions and millions of gallons of raw sewage in our beautiful Lake Champlain. And when I read about it, I cringe because the millions of gallons and what's being done, nothing. I know it's okay.
The concept, Dick, I agree with you that we don't give up our responsibility, but we've set up this system by which petitioners have relied upon in order to secure something that we gave authority to an agency to develop. And so I think there is a legal argument there that they have become vested in the permit as a result of that whole process.
On the day that
with
they
the
filed it.
particular permit. Yeah.
On the day they filed it.
And the
Not
way,
even-
I think the way that Michael described it, this committee is more responsible for encroachment than it is for water quality. You're on Chris's committee. Did Chris decide to take the issue up, or what went on there? Because I think that's his committee's jurisdiction.
No, that's what we talked about all morning. That was our agenda
Oh,
this morning. Yeah.
okay.
In fact, Mr. Chairman, he did it largely because you had suggested it. And I think that was something I had asked you to do. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, I think it was worthy of conversation.
Yeah. I don't know where it's gonna go.
Okay, well, as far as this committee is concerned, I believe Corey was in favor of removing the language. Senator Ingalls and Senator Mazza, I believe I'm hearing you're in favor of removing the language.
Aye.
Senator McCormick, I understand you're still agreeable to leaving it in.
Yes.
Okay.
But I do want to be a gentleman about this. I think Senator Mazza makes a strong argument. I'm not entirely sure how to rebut it.
Okay, well, absent dueling
And-
pistols at 30 paces.
No, I just got to say, Senator Mazza looks entirely too pleased with himself, but otherwise.
Gee, oh, God.
I think what I end up with
Well.
is a statement from our committee that we want to challenge this language.
Correct.
I
And
probably,
I don't even care whether it's a boat. I don't care whether it's a plane. I don't
Right,
care
right.
what it is.
Doesn't make any difference.
It's the principle of once
not-
you have the permit in hand and you've gone through it, and it's not like all these people haven't had a chance to step up and challenge it.
Right.
They've had the chance to do it.
Yep.
The decision's been made. We had clear, anyway, the decision's been made. On we go. It doesn't matter. It's not even about this boat. It's about the process.
We're gonna bring it to Newport.
Yep.
so I'm going to take that as a directive to challenge the language. And the only remaining question then for both Art and John is, will it attract walleyes if it's sunk? That's a whole nother issue for our committee. That
Yeah.
boat and the walleyes may be the only two issues we have to dispute the House committee about. So I think that does it. For today's purposes, we're going to call it quits. Thank everybody for coming. Denise, you can take us off the live YouTube.